it appears as if Josh Pate is hinting that something could happen with Florida State and Clemson. Can you give me some background, Caleb?
Yes, the long story short of it is Josh Pate is saying that he is tied into some attorneys and people that are adjacently in the know with the Florida State and Clemson thing, and that it's only a matter of time before they're out of the SEC, before they're out of the ACC.
Well, now it is a matter of time because they've got 8 years left on the contract. But the question is the matter of time months or is it years?
Let me just play a quick snippet of what he said, and then okay. Dave, give me your thoughts.
Okay.
So we're coming up on Big Ten Media Days. We're coming up on SEC Media Days. I keep getting told from people who are much more in the know on this than me, July. I think there's a mid-August date that technically, if you're a Florida State and you want to get out in time for 2025, you kind of need to have the ball already down the hill by that point. That's in the weeds. When would it be?
Okay.
So,
in the weeds is a phrase that I think means a million different things. What do you think he means by in the weeds there to encapsulate his thought?
Basically, Josh Pate, and guys, check out the full video. The point he is making, and it's in his headline, is that we could expect a bombshell in July. And the way he comes out with it is this. The example he gave leading in. Remember 3 years ago? Dave, we were coming out of COVID. We were ready for the 2021 football season. SEC Media Day started. We were just expecting another normal football season, right? And the day of SEC Media Days, Greg Sankey comes up and goes, hey, guys, by the way, we've been negotiating with Texas and Oklahoma for a year now, and they're going to join the SEC in 2024.
Well, he didn't announce it. It was broke.
It was broken, but they made sure it broke the day of SEC Media Days where they can maximize the coverage of it.
No, I don't think they made sure. I think that Texas made sure because that's why it went through the Pioneer Express. But anyway, it was leaked and it broke during SEC Media Days. I don't think that was intentional. I actually think Greg Sankey got caught with his pants down, which speaks to your fact that you don't like Greg Sankey. But nevertheless, that is how it broke. I had zero idea the day before. You had zero idea the day before that Texas and Oklahoma could be in the SEC. As a matter of fact, when I heard it, I was like, what? And I didn't believe it. So you're right. These things do come out of left field. Now, my question to you, if Florida State and Clemson get out of the SEC, does that mean the whole ACC now disbands, falls apart, and then it's time for Pickens? Or are we just talking about FSU and Clemson getting out of it specifically?
So that's the real $1 million question. By the way, for the record, the very next year, USC, UCLA going to the Big Ten happened in July. So these things happen in July, it seems like. I think the ACC disbands because North Carolina also wants out. And so what I'm saying and what I'm thinking is that there are enough ACC teams willing to leave at that point because the Big 12 is thinking long-term viability. And so, the SEC may not need him, but the Big 12 would take a Miami, wouldn't they? And the Big 12 would take a Virginia Tech.
Yes. I think we're at the point where people are going to take anybody that has some semblance of competency because I think there's some strength in numbers. Now, I'm not saying you would take, no offense, Memphis, but you would take Miami because Miami's a better program than Memphis. So,
some reports came out that the SEC and Big Ten have no interest in Miami. So Miami's work, if the Miami right now is committed to the ACC, and if it implodes, they would like to go to the Big 12. Not fun for us because if Dave and I are going to travel in a few years, I'd love to be able to go to Miami to cover games. But
and yes, the Ritz there is fantastic. But Miami's not an SEC city at all. You and I would spend more time going to clubs than we would doing football things because
Austin's hardly an SEC city.
Do what?
I said Austin is hardly an SEC city.
When I was at Austin, it was pretty SEC-ish, but it did have a good entertainment district as well. It had a great entertainment district. But you had the campus downtown. You have to take a 45-minute drive to get to campus to get to the stadium, the Hard Rock Casino. That to me is just shameful.
Yeah, it's not even in Miami, the university. It's like when you think of these urban schools, right? It's like when you think of these urban schools, it's funny you brought up Memphis, there's Louisville, there's Cincinnati, like these city represented schools. Miami is a tiny private school in a suburb of the city, 45 minutes out. I don't even know why it's called Miami, honestly.
Okay, let me don't look at the YouTube. Okay? Don't look at it.
Okay.
Because I put the poll question: if Florida State, Clemson leave the ACC, the SEC should get Florida State, Clemson, both, or neither. I'm good. What do you think is leaning?
I'm going to say neither. I'm good.
You're right. I would have thought both. So neither I'm good has 50% of the vote, both has 36% of the vote, and then each have 7% of the vote as far as Florida State and Clemson. I'm in the both category. I think it balances you too as a conference. And I know you want to do the congruent states, which you would still do, which Rick Sankey said last year. But I also think that it's important to be balanced countrywide. So you ventured west a little bit. How about venture a little bit more to the east and get Clemson, and then south and get Florida State? Now, the two main hurdles that you've got to get, South Carolina and Florida State, Florida used to have to sign off on this thing. I was thinking this the other day. Do you really think the SEC has to call individual schools to say, will you sign off on this anymore, or are we beyond that? Because I think the SEC and the individual conferences have gotten so strong that they might call and do a survey, but they're not saying, South Carolina, can we please bring in Clemson? They're in your state. Is that okay? I don't think those conversations happen anymore. And I do think they did about 30 years ago, which is why you got Arkansas at South Carolina as the first expansion, which on face value, they turned out okay. But on face value, that was lame back in 1992. Sorry, it was.
It was. And by the way, they got South Carolina as a default because they wanted Florida State. They wanted Florida State badly. You bring up a point. I think that the SEC. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought for a second, which happens to me a lot. But I think Florida State, with schools signing off, I think at this point schools are understanding that they're in an era where they need their conference to stay competitive. The SEC has to stay competitive with the Big Ten in terms of its revenue coming in and things like that. Right. And so, yeah, I think the schools will sign off on it, and they'll have to. The only question, it may not be if Florida will sign off on it. Guys, I'm hearing some reports. Florida State may be overestimating how valued they are if they're on the open market looking for a conference. They don't fit the Big Ten's model because the Big Ten has the AAU mandate. And Florida State, for those who don't know, is a terrible academic school. So there's that's a problem for the Big Ten.
Except when it comes to film study. That's another story.
Oh, interesting. Didn't know that.
Burt Reynolds left him all his money. Go ahead.
The SEC, I think, would take Florida State and Clemson. I do, because I think they'd love to go to 20 teams. But I think their main desire, they want to get UVA in North Carolina. They want to get at those two southern states.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to not take a program because of academics. I don't.
No, not the SEC, but the Big Ten will.
Right. I don't think the Big Ten's going to either. I think let's pick a school. Is Texas one of those high academic schools?
Yeah, it is. Texas is an AAU
okay,
school.
Give me a high. Give me Alabama is not a high academic school. Oh, I think Georgia. Georgia's not a high academic school. What if they got? Actually, it's pretty high.
Those are good schools. They're not AAU schools. Like Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee are on similar levels.
Okay, you're telling me. Okay, so Alabama, Georgia call each other. They say we'd like to enter the Big Ten and join you guys and become super mega conference because we realize your television contract is better and you got more money, but we don't have the same academic credentials that you do. Can we join? They would say absolutely.
You're right. They probably would change at that point. They would. Well, also, to be fair, they made an exception because like Notre Dame wasn't an academic school, wasn't an AAU school. It's a good academic school, but it wasn't an AAU school for a long time. And, you know, the Big Ten, for everybody who doesn't know, the Big Ten has had an open
what
invitation.
AAU is, because it makes me think of young kids playing basketball in the Marriott courtyards that I'm at.
They are just school. It's an AAU citation that it's a collective, private, nonprofit group that basically gives this title out to schools that reach a certain academic standard. And it's kind of like the U.S. News and World Report. Like, it's just kind of a thing that like people value, and the Big Ten values it. Notre Dame didn't have it because they didn't have a specific program you had to have to be an AAU school, even though they were a good academic school. So the Big Ten created a carve out if you're not an AAU school so they could keep their open invitation to Notre Dame. Because for those who don't know, Dave, you know this, the Big Ten's had an open invitation to Notre Dame for about 50 years, haven't they?
Oh,
like,
they probably had an open invitation to every conference for 50 years.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So
here's my problem with the Big Ten. And I've known people that have gone to schools there, and they may be watching. I don't want to rail, but if so, I'm talking to you. This pompous attitude, you're an incredibly better academic conference. Listen, these decisions come down to athletics because athletics lead to money. Okay? I'm just going to tell you, I've done way more research about colleges than I ever dreamed I would, Caleb, with two kids that are that age. And I'll give you an example. Iowa's master's writing program takes 80 people, right? 80 people. But if some guy called and said, I wanted to donate $10 million, can you take 81? They're going to take 81. It's the same thing in sports. At the end of the day, all of these conferences and power brokers, as long as they don't have to totally sell their soul, they're going to make decisions based off athletics, which is money, right?
No, that's very true. That is very true. You're right. They will make their decision based off money. I mean, I said this years ago for those who don't know, I'm obviously a Maryland grad, and I said this to my fellow Maryland fans that got really mad at the Terps prioritizing football over basketball about 12 years ago. They're like, we're a basketball school. I'm like, yeah, and if you stay a basketball school, you're going to collapse as a sports program because basketball doesn't generate any money, guys, and it's all football. You make the decisions based on football, and that is a consistent thing. And I'm with you on that. They probably would go for Alabama and Georgia. I think the Big Ten's main focus right now is if they could expand. I've told you this before. When you combine realistic who you could get and schools that would add value, the bidding war is going to be, I will just tell you this, Virginia and North Carolina. The Big Ten and the SEC, Dave, are going to fight like hell to get those two schools when the ACC collapses.
And I agree with that, but I think it's coincidence that they're great academic schools. I think in this particular case, the SEC likes the schools, what they would bring, some football, some basketball, and regionality as well.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So yeah, I think that I just think that makes it easier though, because they don't have to pretend that they're sacrificing any of those standards to get Virginia and UNC. And the SEC, I get Florida State and Clemson's value, and maybe TV market doesn't mean what it once did 15 years ago. But Dave, don't you think the SEC would like to have a footprint in every single southern state or border state that, like, don't you think that would be something that they feel is relevant?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that would be nice. I don't think it's something that Greg Sankey wakes up in the middle of the night worried about. I don't. Now, which of these programs would best help Tennessee? Obviously, we're a Tennessee channel. So I look at Florida State and Clemson. I think they would both hurt Tennessee because I think those are recruiting areas that Tennessee wants to be good in. And right now, Florida's flopping around like a dead shark laying on Jim McElwain. And
okay, I'll tell you why it helps Tennessee significantly.
Okay, we'll argue that. And I might want to see a column out of that too, because I don't think you want more competition in the nation's best conference.
I think when Florida State and Clemson are added, the ACC collapses and the SEC is going to reach into, like I told you, North Carolina and Virginia. They'll try first for North Carolina and Virginia. But Dave, don't you agree that if they don't get those two schools, they would, if you miss out on North Carolina, you're settling on NC State, right? Above Duke or Wake Forest, and you want to get a North Carolina school?
Well, you're settling short term, but didn't you settle on Texas A&M and you ended up luring Texas anyway? I mean, Unfortunately, being a business owner has taught me to be incredibly patient. So maybe you take NC State to get North Carolina. If somebody told me that never in the rest of your life you'll get North Carolina if you take NC State, then I'd say run off, Wolfpack. But if I thought I had a chance at the Tar Heels by taking NC State and keeping that rivalry, which Crystal points out would have been neat, because she said Virginia as well, then I don't have a problem. She mentioned Duke as well. I think those schools would be pretty cool.
So long story short, they're going to take a school from North Carolina and a school from Virginia. Can we say that? I think if they add Florida State and Clemson, they will also add a school from North Carolina and a school from Virginia, and they will have a 20-team conference. At that moment, when that happens, they would have no choice. They would have to go back to divisions in some way. I think they would have 4 5-team divisions. And
I agree with that.
Tennessee's division would be Vanderbilt, Kentucky, the North Carolina school, and the Virginia school. So they would just have a clear path to being the division champion every single year. And so that's why it would help Tennessee, because their road to winning their division would be the easiest road possible, which would keep them relevant, by the way, in the 12-team college football playoff.
Interesting. What about the recruiting? Do I have a strong argument there that suddenly you have a great recruiter in Clemson that is in that state that is now in the nation's best conference? I could say the same thing for Florida State in a strong recruiting state. I'm not real crazy about either of those if I'm Tennessee's recruiting coordinator. Maybe I like it if I'm Danny White. Maybe I even like it if I'm Josh Heupel because I'd like to play those teams. But as Tennessee's recruiting coordinator, I'm not real happy about it.
That is a concern. But if what happen that I'm saying is going to happen, you can offset the recruiting competition by the fact that you're always relevant being a division champion and in the college football playoff every year. I mean, Dave, let's be honest. Why does Clemson recruit so well? Because they beat up on the weak ACC every year. And so they look really, really good. So it allows them to be competitive with the other Southern states.
So it would bring Clemson back to the pack?
I think Clemson, I think it could. I think it could absolutely bring Clemson back to the pack. I think Clemson and Florida State have both. Like Bobby Bowden, let's be honest. This is what he knew with Florida State joining the ACC. They were going to benefit significantly from obliterating ACC competition every year, and that made them out-recruit Florida for Florida talent for a long time. And I think that the perception of being better because you're beating up on easier competition helps you recruit because you look like a more prestigious program.
Take a second to think about this. Who would be more successful, Clemson or Florida State? And it's brought to you by Apex Apparel Group Design. Look at me with my new embroidered polo. Oops, wrong side. There it is. Look at that. It looks awesome if you're on our video platform. I can't tell you how great it looks. Call Tyler, 865-919-3001, 865-919-3001, or it's right below. Get 15% off your first order for your company. They design, brand, market your way. Unique products to promote your business. That is Apex Apparel Group Design. Call Tyler, 865-919-3001. 865-919-3001, just below. Call Tyler for 15% off. Who would have the most success, Clemson or Florida State, initially and long term?
I think it'd be Florida State. I do. I think Clemson could have success. I'm not knocking that, but Dave, I know this is weird to say because Clemson has won 3 national titles since 1980 with 2 different head coaches. So theoretically, they should be a blue blood with that in mind, right? But I still see Dabo Swinney as bigger than Clemson.
Yeah, I do too. I think Clemson would be the better team. I think Florida State would be, misspoke. Florida State would be the better team initially. Long term, I think Florida State, covering recruiting some in that area, would really struggle if they're in the SEC and they're competing with SEC teams like Lane Kiffin, like LSU, like now Texas, who's going to try to pull people from the Panhandle and recruits there a lot. I think Clemson long term would be way better off than Florida State. If I'm Florida State, I don't want any part of it. Now their administrators made for more money, but if I'm their coach, I don't want any part of the SEC, just like Bobby Bowden did.
Well, what about this though? And you've recovered recruiting in the area. say Miami doesn't join the SEC and they're in a second-tier conference. Don't you think Florida State has an advantage recruiting South Florida over Florida because they're playing Miami every other year in Miami?
No, it's good. And if I'm Florida, I'm going to set up that annual rivalry as well, aren't you?
Yes, because you want to recruit. You want to recruit Miami. Miami is going to say, if you're Miami and you don't get into the SEC or the Big Ten, you should refuse to play Florida State and Florida, right? Because you don't want them coming to that area.
I agree.